Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Jack Hagel. North Carolina Democrats reelected Anderson Clayton as the state party chair over the weekend, again putting a 27-year-old in charge of a critical state for the party. Clayton originally won the seat in 2023, promising to improve the party's ground game in the state and to boost Democratic performance in statewide elections. Republican President Donald Trump won North Carolina, but Democrats picked up an executive branch seat, retained the governor's mansion, and broke a Republican supermajority in the state legislature. WRAL state government reporter Paul Specht covered the Democrats' meeting over the weekend. He also sat down with Clayton for an extended interview. He joins us now to tell us about what's in store for her second term. Paul, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
I want to start with where the North Carolina Democratic Party was in 2022, after the election that year.
They were fed up. North Carolina Democrats had just lost every single statewide race in the state, and that included a U.S. Senate race that they had poured money into. That was Sherry Beasley, a former state Supreme Court justice, against Ted Budd, a Republican congressman who is now in the Senate. And Democrats thought they could do better. They looked around at other swing states in 2022 and saw people with, Republican-controlled legislatures where Democrats had showed up and elected Democrats to these statewide offices. And they thought, why can't we do it here? So they entered a meeting in the winter of 2023 after those midterms thinking, we need to do better, we need change. And it didn't come easy. And that's because the party chair at the time was Bobby Richardson. A lot of people liked Bobby Richardson. No one had any gripes about her as a person. She was a former legislator. People had known her for years. She was endorsed by then Governor Roy Cooper and then Attorney General Josh Stein. People liked her. But they thought that the party could do a better job organizing, putting boots on the ground, and getting voters to the polls. And so they elected a 25-year-old instead of the incumbent.
And that was Clayton. What did she say, or what did she do leading up to that party chair election to get people on board with her?
She said that the party has the people throughout the state that it needs. It just needs to do a better job of reaching them and convincing them to knock doors and go out and, support this. Now, organizing is a big deal. And within partisan party politics, there are long debates about, do you win with money and putting ads on air, on the airwaves, or do you win with boots on the ground? It's a combination of both, but some leaders prefer are more comfortable with one strategy over the other. Clayton said, I can get the people on the ground. I can build an outreach organization that will do better than what we currently have.
Now, you sat down with her recently. Does she think that she made good on her promise in the first election?
She does. Clayton was, as you might suspect, really upset that Vice President Kamala Harris didn't carry North Carolina. However, as she put it, there are bright spots in North Carolina that don't exist in other states. For instance, North Carolina, of all the battleground states, of all the swing states that people were watching, there's 6 or 7 of them, North Carolina moved to the right less than every other state except Wisconsin. On top of that, the Democrats won several statewide elections. Governor, lieutenant governor is a seat they flipped. Attorney general, they kept that seat. They flipped education superintendent. They won a key toss-up congressional district out east. That's Don Davis's district. And they appear to be on their way to winning a state Supreme Court race. It's still in court, even after 2 months. The Democrat, Allison Riggs, appears to have gotten about 700 more votes than the Republican, Jefferson Griffin, although that's tied up. And Clayton pointed to that race specifically as an example of the party organization's work. Now, campaigns are won, races are won in a lot of ways. And in the presidential race and in U.S. Senate races, often those are organized by people in Washington, D.C. She says the down ballot races, the ones that people often overlook, like judicial races, those are the ones that rely much more on the state party apparatus. And she points to Riggs's victory as evidence of improvement at the party.
And it's probably worth underscoring that, even though that race is not resolved, it's not certified, and there's still a chance that Griffin could win that race. She still sees that as a victory, right?
That's right. I'm using her words here, that she sees Riggs' lead in that race, if you will, as a Democratic victory. She would argue that if it is overturned, she would use words like goes to show that democracy doesn't work. I've heard her say that at press conferences, things like that. But she points to that race specifically as evidence that the party improved its performance from prior elections.
Well, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll hear what Anderson Clayton wants to do in her second term and why she thinks Democrats lost North Carolina in the presidential election. Stick around. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. We're talking with WRAL state government reporter Paul Specht about the North Carolina Democratic Party. Paul, North Carolina was considered a presidential battleground in 2024, as it often is. Republican Donald Trump won the state. Did Clayton offer her take on why Democrats couldn't carry it for Harris?
She did. She thinks that former President Biden should have gotten out of the race sooner. One thing that Anderson Clayton talks about a lot is the localization of politics, how people like their politicians, how they like the Democrat they see down the street. They like their governors. And if you look at polling across the country, consistently, voters like their governor more than they like people that they send to D.C., and that includes presidents and things like that. Well, Clayton told me she thought that more people would have liked Kamala Harris if she had more time, she being Harris, more time to introduce herself to voters. And one thing she brought up was humanization. A lot of people knew Joe Biden, and a lot of people at the end knew they didn't want him to come back. But they weren't sure they wanted Harris. And one thing Clayton brought up was, a lot of people didn't know that Kamala Harris could cook. Kamala Harris could crack an egg with one hand. These are examples she gave. And she said, people know of people like Kamala Harris. She thought that if she had time to make the rounds, to be herself more, for people to see themselves in the vice president more, then maybe things would have turned out differently. I thought that was a pretty interesting answer, pretty candid on her part.
The Democratic Party has developed a reputation among some critics as elitist and maybe tone deaf. You asked Clayton about that. What did she tell you?
That's right. And that's one thing that Republicans are throwing at the Democrats now, too. When we reached out to the North Carolina Republican Party about, the elections happening over on the other side, they said, hey, they've got a lot of work to do because they're elitist and they're out of touch. And Clayton said that might be true at the national level, but when she looks across North Carolina, she feels pretty comfortable with the elected leaders we have now. Obviously, for the Democrats, that's Josh Stein in the governor's mansion, Jeff Jackson as attorney general, Mo Green, the education superintendent, and others. Don Davis, the congressman, he did ads during his campaign talking about working in the tobacco fields. And she brought up Roy Cooper specifically. The man has never lost a race, Roy Cooper. And she talks about how his superpower is his ability to relate to people. He's from Nash County. That's rural. His family has farms. He sounds different than the H.R. Scolds that Democrats are made out to be. So she agrees that there's room for improvement on a national level, but she thinks that at a more local level, they don't fit the stereotype that Republicans are casting on them.
Now, Clayton is the youngest party chair in the country. I would imagine that she would have had to have done a lot of work to really build trust as she entered her first term. Is that right? What did she tell you about that?
Right. So at the time, people, I assume, were suspicious of her. She sort of came out of nowhere, right? And in the past, the Democratic Party has had chairs, has elected chairmen that donors and elected leaders weren't crazy about. And so that raises tensions. What Clayton had to do was convince, Cooper and Stein and other donors that, hey, she was not here to mess things up. She's not here to, undermine them in any way. She's here to provide more support, better support than what they currently have. And she says, it was hard. She approached donors who wouldn't give to her in her first year and then came back around in her second year, being 2024, ahead of the election. And one thing that she did to sort of prove herself was hustle. She says it was that simple, rather than, a lot of people might have expected her to just do all these media hits and say, hey, I'm the youngest ever, and, look at me, I'm the best, and I'm going to go take the mic. She said that she put so many miles on her car, going from place to place to place, just to make sure that the Democrats in these elections had the resources they need. She mentioned yard signs. She mentioned fundraisers. She went and spoke at county commissions meetings in red counties if the local Democrats asked her to. And so to sort of build trust, that's what she did. She sort of led by putting in the work. And she would say that she thinks it works. She would say that she has a good relationship with those elected officials now.
Now, we're at the start of an off year. What is her agenda for her second term in the first year and then as we get closer to the election?
Many parties, many state parties around the country, their finances ebb and flow with elections. On non-election years, the finances go down, they have to lay off some staff, and then they hire some back in the bigger election years. Well, Clayton wants to get North Carolina, the party organization, to the point where it has a full-time staff no matter the year. And there aren't many states that can do this. And the states that do have robust staffs are typically in either Democratic states or states with unions. She pointed to Michigan and Wisconsin as examples of people who in recent years were able to really build out their staffs and improve their ground games, but they get union dues. She pointed out in our interview, and obviously we don't have unions or very powerful unions here in North Carolina. So the road to her vision will take longer than just 2 years, but she hopes to do it. I think she mentioned her timeline would be 2030, because that's the year that there are obviously big elections, and it's the year when our state legislators redraw the maps, and whoever has a majority in that state house gets to redraw them. And that's a chance where Democrats can have some influence and maybe make fairer maps. She would say they're gerrymandered right now. Republicans say they're not. But that's her vision, is to have a full-time operation that can reach out to people on any given year, election or not.
Is that a pipe dream? I mean, in many ways, Democrats are really hamstrung by a strong Republican apparatus in the state. The GOP controls the legislature and the courts. How does that impact her ability to get things done in the state?
Well, obviously they can't set state policy. Democrats can't, because they don't have much influence in the state legislature. The Republicans control the state House and the state Senate. Obviously, Governor Stein can veto legislation he doesn't like, but then he has to rely on Democrats to show up to veto override votes and support him. And that doesn't always happen. Sometimes Republicans call votes when Democrats aren't there. Sometimes Democrats just aren't present.
And they're one seat shy of a supermajority, right?
Right, and they're one seat. The Republicans only need one seat for a supermajority, so the margins are really slim here. What Clayton says is they have to show up in communities. They have to show people that the Democratic Party cares about them, even when it's not a presidential election. They have to show up at county commissions meetings and fight for, as she put it, fight for books that are up for being banned. They have to, show up like she did at her home Person County commission meeting to fight against pipelines that are being planned near schools. That's another example she gave. And whether or not she can fulfill this vision, I think what's even scarier about it is that it's not up to her. It's up to donors to decide whether or not they want to invest in North Carolina. What we do know is that North Carolina can swing either way, at least on the governorship and other state offices, it can. Now, it's been a while since North Carolina went blue for the presidential race or for a U.S. Senate race. She's going to have to convince these donors that it's worth spending their money here, even when it's not sexy to do so.
Do you think Republicans have anything to worry about?
It's hard to answer that question without putting ourselves in the shoes of Republicans. And in the last election, Republicans saw big gains with young people, specifically young men. Anderson Clayton, famously not a young man, but she is young, and she is from North Carolina. Other Democrats have said that her superpower, as they put it, is inspiring people. She's great speaking off the cuff, and she sounds authentic. when she does it. And so if I were a Republican, I would think that Anderson Clayton would probably be effective at college campuses, speaking to young people and relating to them in a way that, someone who's in their 40s or 50s or 60s can't. And so, and that's who she replaced. She replaced a former legislator who was much older than her. So I don't know that Republicans would say they fear her. I think that Clayton can reach people that other party leaders cannot. And I think that's something that any party would want, is a young person who's seen as authentic, who can go in rooms and talk to people and relate to them in ways that the stereotypical politician can't.
Where do you think she goes from here? You've been covering state politics for years. She's clearly a rising star in the party. Where do you think this will take her?
She's, according to Ben Wickler, who's the party chair in Wisconsin for the Democrats, she's viewed very highly among other state party chairs, people at the Democratic National Committee. It's hard to say. It's very easy to envision her going on to run some sort of big campaign, or going on to the big DNC, or getting some big consulting job, because her passion is campaigns and organizing. So it won't shock me if she goes on to do that. However, North Carolina is her home, and she cares a lot about what happens here. So maybe she sticks around and runs for something after this, runs for office. I should point out, she's never mentioned doing that. We're sort of just speculating here, but she's awfully young to have accomplished the things she has and gotten the job she did. So she'll have many opportunities, I'm sure.
Going to be interesting to see how she does in this next term and what happens after that. Paul, thanks for your reporting. Appreciate it as always.
Thanks for having me.
That's WRAL state government reporter Paul Specht. For more on his interview with Anderson Clayton, go to the NC Capitol section of WRAL.com. I'm Jack Hagel. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and for making us part of your morning routine. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email with Triangle news, events, and headlines to help you get ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.